Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. So Dr. Lee Pierson has already spoken at one of our events a couple of months ago, and we're glad to have him back. And I think we've had some very good events recently, and one of the things that, one of the main reasons they're so good is that people talk about what they're knowledgeable about, and then don't talk about things where they have no knowledge, which is why I'm going to say a few words and then pass it along and remove myself from the conversation, but I'll still be here. Uh, so first of all, if you enjoy these events and you think others will find them of value, please share them, like them, engage in any way on social media. And of course, if you want to support our work, you can go to aynrandcenter.co.uk/membership and join the membership program. So yeah, without further ado, Josh.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming, and particularly you, Lee, for coming again. I know that our talks on psychology are some of the most popular talks, and I just want to preface this talk this evening by saying that when I was at OCON 2019, one of the highlights for me was sitting down with Lee in the corner of the sort of entrance lobby, and him describing himself as a rather controversial figure in objectivism because of his views on consciousness and volition in animals, and something that I'd like to talk with Lee about at some point. But Lee has always been incredibly generous with his time with me and actually quite a few of the other British objectivists who were there that summer. So I wanted to acknowledge you and thank you for that, Lee, because I didn't do that last time. And just to warn you that Lee actually believes in consciousness, and that's a very rare phenomenon these days. But I'm looking forward to hearing about that, Lee. And the title of tonight's talk is "The Conscious Self as the Manager of Cognition and Action." Over to you, Lee. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I very much enjoyed our discussions that we had at OCON with you, and I think Joseph was there and some other people. So there's a lot of brain power in Britain. Maybe it's not destroyed by progressive education as much as the Americans are. Okay, anyway, so today I'm going to discuss, the title is New Directions in Psychoepistemology, the Conscious Self as the Manager of Cognition and Action. So let's start with psychoepistemology. What's that? Ayn Rand defines psychoepistemology as, quote, the study of man's cognitive processes from the aspect of the interaction between the conscious mind and the automatic functions of the subconscious. That definition comes from the article, The Psychoepistemology of Art, which is in the Romantic Manifesto, her book, The Romantic Manifesto. Now, I want to put forward some ideas, some new ideas about the nature of this interaction, conscious, subconscious. And I'm going to try to get you to rethink what you may have always thought about how the conscious mind works, at least some things that you may have thought. For example, you may think that conscious thoughts cause other conscious thoughts. That's a very natural thing to think, and I don't think that. I want to encourage you to do for yourselves what I teach students to do for themselves, that is to challenge, perhaps even override some assumptions about how consciousness and the subconscious work. And this is, I'd say, largely unexplored territory because, as Josh noted, modern psychology, there is some renewed interest in consciousness, but there's a lot of hostility. There's a lot of hostility to free will, real free will. There's some psychologists believe in what's called compatibilism, which is that free will and determinism are both true. How weird is that? But anyway, there's a lot of hostility to free will and a lot of hostility to introspection still in psychology, unfortunately. So anyway, this hasn't been explored. This is not this has been a heavily explored territory. To my knowledge, there are only 3 people that I know of that are working explicitly on psychoepistemological stuff, and that is Harry Binswanger, who may or may not be here, Jean Binswanger, his wife, and myself. I think those are the three. And there's some written material. There's the original article by Brandon in the Objectivist newsletter called Psychoepistemology. Harry Binswanger has a couple of lecture series on psychoepistemology, which you should hear if you haven't heard them. They're available, I think, as MP3s. And Ayn Rand, of course, has brief remarks on the subject, not an entire essay, but brief remarks in the Romantic Manifesto, in For the New Intellectual, and in the article, the Comprachicos. I'm not, and maybe mentioned very briefly in other places. But it's a crucial topic. I think it's crucial, this topic of psychoepistemology, the general topic, for improving education and for promoting objectivism. And we could talk about that in the question session if anybody desires to, but I'm going to move on. Let me talk a little bit briefly about the evolutionary context of consciousness and volition. This is a topic that is not discussed in current evolutionary psychology. You had an evolutionary psychologist here some time ago, and she wasn't interested in she thought consciousness was a useless topic. But because the current evolutionary psychologists are essentially determinists and mechanists. But we can talk about it in evolutionary way, and I think it's important to do so. Consciousness, I believe, evolved in animals on top of already existing automatic brain processes, neural processes. There was a brain there, at least at some level, there was a brain before consciousness. Now, I don't exactly know where consciousness comes in. Nobody knows that precisely. So I can't say, but that's what I think how it happened. Consciousness evolved for the flexible volitional control of action, that is of movement. It's evolved in animals, not plants, because plants don't have to move. They don't have to make those kinds of decisions. And there's a continuity in evolution, of course. Things don't evolve all at once in one big, as the evolutionary biologists put it, in a saltation. They evolve in a number of continuous steps. Now, volition, in the fullest sense of volition, is a conceptual phenomenon in its fullest sense, but it did not come gift wrapped from God, and placed in your head. It evolved like other capabilities of living organisms in stages. And I think we could call it, if you want a name for it, I'll call it proto-volition. There are earlier stages of volition that still operate actually at the perceptual level. And I'll just make a quick note that I believe that perception is an active process that occurs over time. It's not an instantaneous snapshot or just a passive taking in of stimuli from the outside. But that's another lecture, I think, maybe. Okay, so I said in the title that I referred to the conscious self as the manager of cognition and action. So I should say a word or two about the self, because some people, not particularly objectivists, but some people think there's a problem about the self. Who is the self? I mean, I think David Hume has this problem, and some Asian philosophies have this as a big issue. Where is the self? Who is this self that's doing stuff? Well, I don't think it's a real problem. I'll just indicate briefly why. You can see, for example, in the late philosopher Alan Godhealth said in the workshop sessions that are published in Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, Alan Godhealth said, every awareness is me experiencing something. That is, consciousness by its nature has the me built into it, and the me is doing the experiencing. That's his saying. Also, my old mentor from Cornell University, the greatest perception psychologist ever, James J. Gibson, in his book, An Ecological Approach to Visual Perception, Gibson says, the continuous act of perceiving involves the co-perceiving of the self. And to perceive is to be aware of the surfaces of the environment and of oneself in it. says Gibson. So for example, when everyone knows this phenomenon when you're driving in a car, let's say you're the passenger and you look out the window and the world is whizzing by you as a flow field of things going by you. That flow field specifies a moving observer in a stationary world. That's what that actually gives you perceptually. So you are there from the start, from perception. I think the clincher here is the experience of exerting mental effort, free will, volition. Whoever it is that you experience, whoever it is that exerts mental effort, that's you, that's yourself. And just one more point, the self is not disembodied. There are no disembodied consciousnesses. The self includes your body as well as your mind. All right, I wanted to briefly recap a few things from my previous lecture that we need. I just recapped them because I don't think everyone was there, and it won't hurt to review a couple of things about thinking and volition. And I'm not going to give all as many examples. I'm just going to state some things quickly, and then we'll go on to other stuff. I think you can think of thinking as, I don't say this is a definition, but it's a way of looking at it. Thinking as consciously asking, but subconsciously answering questions that produce new knowledge from old. That's what a thought process. You consciously ask the questions, subconsciously answer them. Or you could say consciously give commands and subconsciously follow commands. That's the distinction between management and labor applied here. Or you could describe it this way. There's a conscious query, an explicit or implicit goal held in mind by mental effort, a subconscious answering process, something goes on in your brain that answers it, and then a conscious result. So from that standpoint, the question is conscious, the process mostly isn't, the subconscious, the process of answering mostly isn't, and then there is a conscious answer that comes back up. Now this description, I think, somewhat overstates what we do consciously, because even the content of the questions, when I ask myself a question, the content is supplied by the subconscious. And I'm going to discuss the subconscious more shortly. But anyway, we consciously supply the directed mental effort to select what in the material provided to consciousness by the subconscious, to select what to ask about. So for example, when I read a post on Harry Binswanger's list, actually, about remembering, and I got a fairly automatic grasp, the subconscious gave me a fairly automatic grasp of what it was saying. But as I read, I reached the word random in the post, and I said to myself, well, I had an inkling. An inkling is a feeling about a thought that is a signal from the subconscious that something's wrong here. So I got this missing. So when I reached the word random, I had to stop, and then I chose volitionally to ask myself, what does random mean here? The question I'm asking myself. Maybe not with all the words. You know, some of these questions are done very quickly and in a schematized way. And then my subconscious answered, in this context, it means without any pattern. And that caused me to realize that that unintended remembering, made me realize what the problem was here. Unintended remembering is not random. It's automatized in a particular way, and therefore it's a mistake to describe it as random. So in this process that I just described, the subconscious did the question answering and also provided the material from which I consciously selected a question to be answered. All right, let me talk a little bit about volition. Volition, free will, is signaled by mental effort. Now everyone knows, I think you know from your own experience what it is to exert mental effort. But what volition does is a knowledge pump. It pumps knowledge from sources both in the perceived world and in your memory, including conceptual memory. And by pumping that knowledge into your thinking, it overrides automatic programming that otherwise would control how your thinking works. Because knowledge is both the product and the fuel of thinking. That is, knowledge is the goal we're trying to achieve. When we think, we're trying to obtain new knowledge. But we need to inject new knowledge into the thought process to make it work. However, we know more and can know more than we automatically use. Automatic processes give us some of the knowledge we need in our thought process, but it doesn't give us enough. So we sometimes get stuck. We sometimes get sidetracked. And that's where volitional focus on key issues comes in. It enables your thinking to go beyond what comes to mind automatically. Now, I'm going to give you, this is my only trick question for today. I gave a few trick questions I've got a few questions, but this is the only trick question for today, just to illustrate this process a little bit. But every thought process illustrates this process. It happens to be true that no Inuit, one of the indigenous people of the far north, those are the Inuit, no Inuit will eat a penguin egg, no matter how hungry they are. They will not eat a penguin egg. And the question is why? Think about that for a second. Well, some of you may realize the answer right away. I hope some of you don't. And if you don't, you can go beyond the automatic response a little bit by activating knowledge about the key issue. And the key issue in this case is, I would put it this way: what is a penguin? What it asks you to think about yourself to activate knowledge about what is a penguin. Well, a penguin is a flightless bird that lives where? Probably some people are putting, let me just see if anybody is putting this in their answers in the chat. Just out of, nobody's chatting yet. Okay, anyway, a penguin is a bird that lives in Antarctica, or actually not on the continent itself. They live on the Ross Ice Shelf, I think. But anyway, the point is they live 25,000 miles away from the nearest Inuit. So it's a silly example, I suppose, but the point is, if it doesn't come to you automatically, you can dig up more knowledge, and that's crucial. Volition is crucial for achieving objectivity. For example, you must use introspectively directed volitional effort to look for counterexamples to any conclusions that you are making. And that, for the most part, that's not going to happen automatically, or even by just by trying harder. So you have to try to, generate them, and that's a volitional act. In fact, I think objectivity and effective problem solving, that is critical and creative thinking, both require going beyond automatized assumptions. And that's the kind of thinking that I use the word creatical for, to cover the underlying processes that are common to both critical and creative thinking. I'm going to postpone. I have an example of using volition to identify a key issue, but I'm going to save it because it's an example that uses visual imagery, and I want to bring it up when we discuss visual imagery. So I'm going to go on from here. Now let's talk a little bit about the subconscious. The subconscious, again, I'm not necessarily offering this as a definitive definition, but it's the subset of the brain and neural activity that is subject to volitional control. That you can exercise some volitional control about what's going on there. There is no reason to suppose, I say, and here Bob will come in later, I think, but I think there's no reason to suppose the existence of a non-material subconscious. There's nothing out there that's sort of like consciousness, similar to consciousness, some kind of mental stuff that's like consciousness, except that it's not conscious. There's no such stuff. Now, the concept of the subconscious is valid and useful, but I don't like the term subconscious, the word. For one thing, as pointed out to me by Dr. Milgram, the term subconscious is an adjective. It really should be subconsciousness, but I think people are embarrassed Of course, that's long too, but I think people are embarrassed to use the term like subconscious. But it's you know, we're not talking about an adjective. We're talking about an existence, something that exists. So there's a kind of grammatical problem. And more importantly, I think what we call the subconscious should contrast with consciousness, not appear to be a reduced form of it. I think that's just a big mistake. I don't know what term to use, so I'm using subconscious. We're all familiar with it, but I think it's a dangerous term. It makes people think that it's like things could move from conscious to subconscious, and they still stay the same. You know, an idea could be in your consciousness, and an idea walks across the line into the subconscious, but it's still an idea, and then it comes back, because they're both the same sort of thing. But I think that's a big mistake. I think that's a big mistake. So here's my basic contention for this talk. Consciousness is non-physical management of cognitive activity. The subconscious is physical, that is neural, brain, labor, you might say. And there's no functional overlap between them. They're very different things. The consciousness and the subconscious are as different as two existences could be in this universe. And there's no functional overlap whatsoever between them, as far as I can see. In my view, all purely automatic action is performed by the brain, everything that's automatic. But automatic processes are entirely insufficient for cognition. No cognition without volition, particularly for acquiring conceptual knowledge. And, you know, I think most of you probably know the contradiction of determinism argument. We could discuss it later if you like, a little bit more later if you like. But in any case, I would say that automatic processes don't make it. They get stuck. They get sidetracked. And you need something to override them. And that's what volition. All acts of volition are performed consciously. There is no separate agent. There's no volition in the brain. I think Harry and Jean emphasized this when they were here recently, and I agree with them on this. There is absolutely, there's no person down there like maybe the Freudian theory holds. There's no such thing. It's just the brain, basically. It's basically essentially a mechanism. Consciousness is an emergent property from the brain. It's not itself a brain process. Now, this is a tricky notion, but I'm just going to say that as I see it, the neural processes cause consciousness. They are not identical to consciousness, they cause. Conscious experience are not identical to neural processes, rather they are caused by neural processes. And consciousness and the brain have entirely different functions, and neither one can substitute for the other. The brain is the engine of cognition. It does the direct work, you might say. Consciousness is its volitional manager. So the alternative is not for an action to be performed either by consciousness alone or by neural processes alone, but rather to be performed by neural processes, either under or not under conscious management. You may want to compare this to the account given by Daniel Kahneman in the best-selling book, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he describes what he calls System 1 and System 2, which is it's a useful idea, but I don't think it's exactly right. System 1 are the fast judgments that he would call intuitive judgments, and System 2 are the slower, intentional, conscious, more rational judgments. Although I don't recall that Kahneman used the word consciousness at all in his book. I don't think he did. Anyway, he calls them System 1 and System 2, and there may be some extent to which that's true, but I think basically it's all one system. And the question is, in the brain, the neural system is one big system. The question is whether whether you place it under conscious management or not. And the System 2 activities are the ones that are placed under conscious management. Okay, so moving right along, because we need to move right along. All automatic action is controlled by the brain, not consciousness. And there's actually many reasons to think that this is true. It's known that people return fast tennis serves more quickly than they're aware of the tennis serve. There's also phenomena like sleepwalking and sleep driving. People can drive in their sleep. Don't try it at home, but people do it. It's very dangerous. It's dangerous because volition is important in driving when you run into something a little different. But anyway, people do it, sleep driving. There's also sexsomnia. I think you can figure out what that is. Doesn't sound like that much fun, but anyway, that's a phenomenon. There is the phenomenon called blindsight, which has been known for a long time, of where there is damage to the, where is that damage? I guess the primary visual cortex, they call V1. And when it's damaged in a certain way, you at least, let's say the right half of your primary visual cortex is damaged, then you will see blankness in the left half of your visual field. You won't see anything. Or the person, an unfortunate person who has this damage, doesn't see anything. Nevertheless, they can point to objects in that field. And they don't know they're there. They say, I don't see anything. They can point to objects. They can perform various tasks that require some knowledge of what's in that area, and it's not conscious. So that's an interesting phenomenon, and it's now been verified in more than one patient. There's the reaction to heat sensation. You put your hand on a red hot stove, and you pull the hand off. Now, people might say, and I think people normally think, that what happens there is that they put the hand on the stove, they feel the horrible pain of the heat, and therefore they withdraw the hand. But that is definitely false. It's known that that is a spinal reflex. And again, it's one of these things that happens more quickly than the conscious awareness. That's a spinal reflex. So that's a simple case. I think that's true of other cases as well, other similar cases. There is a famous research subject in neuropsychology, the most famous research subject, whose initials are HM. I think his last name was Mollison or something, but it doesn't matter. There was this poor guy, HM, who had serious epilepsy, and they tried to correct it. I guess they did correct it by ablating, destroying various parts of his brain, including most of his hippocampus, which is a part of the brain strongly involved in creating new memories. So I think it worked on his epilepsy pretty well, but he got anterograde amnesia afterwards. He couldn't form new memories, or he basically couldn't form new memories, or very few new memories. And this is a very, debilitating disability. It happened. It was described in the movie Mementos. Some of you may have seen that. I think I myself have a little bit of anterograde amnesia because when I I used to play bridge. I don't know if we have a world-class bridge player I shouldn't even talk about on here, but Adam Wildowski. But I used to play bridge, and when you finish a hand, you discuss the hand with the other people. I had a hard time remembering the cards. Everybody else remembered the hand easily. I had to struggle to remember because my brain just wipes the previous event. It just wipes it clean, and I go on to the next one, which I think is helpful in some ways, but I don't know. Anyway, this is a sideline because the reason I brought up HM was not because of amnesia, but a lesser known feature of his disability is that HM had on certain parts of his body no conscious pain sensation. That was destroyed. And so he can't feel pain over in his chest and somewhere. I don't remember how much exactly. And this is a big problem, but he didn't, it wasn't a terrible problem for him. For congenital analgesiacs, people that have it from birth, that have no pain, the neurons don't work, what they call nociceptors don't work at all properly. Those people have a hard time surviving because they go around damaging themselves. HM didn't do that because although he didn't have the conscious sensation of pain, his nociceptors still worked, and his automatic systems, the automatic response to pain was still in operation, and that's pretty good. That will save you from a lot of the trouble. But it shows that the dissociation that can exist between a conscious perception or sensation, whatever you want to call it, of pain, and the non-conscious registration in the brain. They are not the same thing. Okay, I think that scientific research from at least 4 areas, psychology, neuroscience, evolutionary biology, and artificial intelligence, will continue to develop and support the idea that automatic action is controlled entirely by the brain. For example, in artificial intelligence, as they continue to make robots work better, we'll be able to see strong evidence that all kinds of automatic actions can be controlled by mechanical processes. And I think at the same time, I expect my own expectation is that artificial intelligence will continue to fail to produce those activities that can only come from volitional thought. I don't think that's going to happen. So as we see that distinction developing, there will be more evidence for the distinction between volitional and automatic action. And automatic action is mechanical in nature. Well, you might say, what about memory? You might ask, what about memory? As I have been asked. Don't conscious experiences create memories? Don't you have to have a conscious experience? You know, a searing thought in your mind, I think is the way Harry Binswanger puts it. And then that's made into a memory? And I say no. No, when neural processes create a conscious experience, and all conscious experiences are created by neural processes, as far as we know, all of them. When neural processes create a conscious experience of, say, something that you're perceiving, I believe that those same processes contribute simultaneously to laying down a memory trace in the brain. This is a physical trace that is created at the same time as your consciousness awareness is created. So you don't have to, your consciousness doesn't have to send down some stuff afterwards, extra stuff afterwards. That's just unnecessary to lay down the memory. There's no need for your consciousness to be involved in laying down its physical memory trace in the brain. Also, by the way, in this connection, there are no conscious experiences in memory. There's no such thing as a storehouse of concepts. There's no such place. Rather, what is stored, and I use the word with quotation marks because it's not really accurate, what is stored is the physical potential for recreating experiences when remembering occurs. So there's something in the brain that we don't know the exact nature, and it goes through some stages, but it's something electrical and chemical in nature, most likely. There's an immense amount of research on this subject, but anyway, it's physical is the point. There's a physical trace of some kind or kinds that's stored. So where do conscious experiences go when they leave awareness? Where do they go? The answer is nowhere. They just disappear. They don't become subconscious memory traces. Those have already been formed in the brain. When something goes out of your consciousness, it goes out of existence, period. Now, by the way, with respect to memory, in intentional memorizing, mental effort causes neural processes to work longer. That's what volition does. It makes sure it does have a volition has a causal effect on the brain. And we don't know exactly, but it has effect on neural processes, and I think it makes them make more connections with stuff that's already there in memory. But memorization is volitional, intentional memorization. So this is entirely in accord with my view that the causal efficacy of consciousness consists of volitional action. Volitional effort causes further knowledge of what you are trying to memorize to become active in your thinking, thus making more material available for more memory connections. Okay, so I have already said, basically, what I have written here, that neural processes are the proximate causes of all conscious experiences. I use the word proximate, immediate, because I don't want to. I don't think we're brains in a. We're not brains in a vat. You know, we have a body, and what you do with your body matters. Consciousness is an embodied phenomenon, but nevertheless, proximately in terms of conscious awareness, it's the neural processes that cause them, and I think there's plenty of evidence for that. All conscious experiences, including pains, pleasures, thoughts, images, emotions, words, are the products of neural processes and exist, I believe, exist only to motivate, inform, motivate, and facilitate volitional action. Conscious experiences are like the readouts on the dashboard of an automobile, you know, the gas gauge and the oil gauge and the speedometer and all that stuff. They're indicators. Volition, on the other hand, contrary-wise, is not and cannot be volitional action. Volitional choice is not and cannot be caused by neural activity. And it's like pressing the gas pedal in the car. So it has an actual causal influence on the way the engine works, but the readouts don't. But you use the readouts to direct your usage of the gas pedal. You know, if you want to go faster, you push on the gas pedal. Oh, by the way, the vehicle we're talking about in the case of humans is to a significant extent what they call an autonomous vehicle. A lot of it is controlled by automatic programmed processes, but not all. Okay, how do conscious experiences facilitate volition? Well, for example, one's experience of words, especially when they're integrated in questions, they function as handles for volitionally pumping knowledge into the thought process. That's the penguin egg example. You volitionally grab onto a word or a question, and by exerting the effort of holding on to that question, your brain will give you more information about whatever it is you're asking about. So words are very useful because they can concretize abstractions, but they're dangerous. Also, there's a quotation from the old French psychologist Ribot, which I thought was interesting. Ribot says, "The word much resembles paper money, having the same usefulness and the same dangers." And it's useful to have paper money. You don't have to carry gobs of gold around with you, but if somebody's out there inflating the currency, you know, if you have a currency without any backing whatsoever, that's like rationalistic use of words. You can't effectively pump knowledge from words that don't have clear reference, or you can't pump knowledge from them or from propositions made from them. All right, well, obviously there's much more that can be said about words, but I just want to catalog some of the some various conscious experiences. So next up is images. Images can also be pumped for knowledge. Visual imagery reflects the activation of perceptual neural processes to create remembered or imagined material. It's the form in which we have control over certain neural activity. So here's an example, a well-known visual imagery test. Stop for a moment and think about the question, how many windows do you have in your house or apartment? Okay, I'm just going to do this where I used to live in New York City. I had an apartment because it's easier. So I'm going to imagine and of course, what do you do? I imagine my apartment. I imagine walking in the door, and there's the main room off to the right that has 3 windows. There's one bedroom that has 1 window, and there's another bedroom that has 1 window. That's it for me. 5 windows. I just count them off from what I visualized. And I'm sure most of you can do that. There are some people that I've heard claim to have no visual imagery whatsoever, and I don't know how they do it. Maybe we have somebody here that can say, but anyway, visualization is a possible way. Now, thinking in its full sense is verbal. That's what we learned from Ayn Rand. But this is another thing. I view this in the same way I view the concept of volition. Okay, that's in its fullest sense, that's true. But there are processes, I'm going to use the term mentation. It's a broader term that may not be verbal, but have some cognitive significance. So here's one that here's a problem that I encountered today that you may find interesting, where there are at least sensory, for me, there were sensory accompaniments, a visual accompaniment to the thought process. So this is a question I just ran into it on the internet this morning. And you don't have to answer it. We'll answer it in a moment, but you can think about it if you like. And if anybody wants to post their answer in the chat, they are welcome to do so. Here's the question. In a barn, 100 chickens sit peacefully in a circle. Suddenly, each chick randomly pecks the chick immediately to its left or right. What is the expected number of unpecked chicks? This is a probability concept, so you have to know a little bit here. But what is the expected number? How many chicks would you expect not to be pecked? Now, this was in a math contest somewhere with kids, and some kid got the answer in less than a second. I can't do that, but I can tell you what my thought process was. I read this thing, okay, 100 chicks in a circle. I had that wrong for a while. I put them in a line and I started worrying about the ends, but then I realized, oh, it's a circle. So I got off that. It was a misinterpretation. It's a circle, and and each chick randomly picks the chick immediately left or right. So what that means is, I interpret that. What is that word? Random. There's that word random again. What does that mean? In this context, it means equal probability of doing either one chick or the other chick to your left or right. And so then what I did, not instantly knowing the answer, I asked one of my favorite, possibly my favorite introspective question. I stepped back and I asked myself, I'm trying to get the key idea here to focus my listening focus on. So I asked myself, what specifically makes this question difficult for me to answer? For me, see, this is a process. It's not necessarily philosophically objective, but I'm going to call it, it's individually objective. It's an objective judgment for me. What makes it difficult for me to answer? Well, it's the 100, because there are 100 chicks. That's too many. So that immediately got me to apply a heuristic. I know I have a whole armamentarium of heuristics, and this is one of my favorites, which I call thinking in small terms. Don't deal with 100 chicks. I went down to three chicks. And I imagined the 3 chicks in a little circle, and then I focused on one of them. What's the probability of, what do I want to know, unpecked chicks? So what's the probability of that chick being unpecked? Well, he's got a 50% chance of being pecked on one side. Let's see. I had this, now I'm not even sure I've got this totally straight. 50% chance, maybe I better figure out. No, that's right, okay. Yeah, I can do it straightforwardly. I got a 50% chance of not being pecked from one side and a 50% chance of not being pecked from the other side. So to get the combination of those two, to get both of those, you multiply the probabilities. So 0.5 times 0.5 is 0.25. And that's when you have 100 chicks, 0.25 times 100 is 25 chicks, which is the right answer. And then after I worked that out, I thought to myself, well, what happens, because I've only dealt with 3 chicks here. What happens when you increase it? So when you go to 4 or 5 or 6, and I very quickly realized it doesn't make any difference at all. It all comes out the same. So visualization had a certain role in that process. Let me talk about another, here we go, another unusual form of imagery that I have some personal experience with. And therefore, I just thought it would be interesting. Namely, synesthesia. Synesthesia is a perceptual, I'm now that quoting from that well-regarded source, Wikipedia. Synesthesia is a perceptual phenomenon in which stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway leads to involuntary experiences in a second sensory or cognitive pathway. What that means is the most common form, anyway, of synesthesia involve colors. Some people hear sounds as colors or see numbers as colors. That's the most common. I do not have that for some reason. Unfortunately for me, my imagery is I pretty much have a black and white set. Yeah, occasionally I see a thing in color or two, but mostly my stuff is black and white. So I don't have that. What I have instead is shapes, visual shapes for music. When I listen to a piece of music, it just comes up. I see shapes. They're not super vivid, but I see them. And I often, when I'm listening to music, I kind of close my eyes because I want to enjoy the shapes. And there are all kinds of shapes. They're fairly consistent with the type of music. And some of them seem to be abstractions from the instruments, Stringed music, if I hear a violin section, it's kind of long, stringy little things. But they're not all like that. Anyway, I have that. I can't describe that. And I'm such a terrible artist, I can't draw that. And it's moving anyway. It's moving. I also have a form of conceptual synesthesia. I see numbers. Well, let's just start with, I see dates as shapes. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Here's my drawing. I drew 5. And for me, it goes from I see it's backwards here. I'm gonna turn it up this way. That's the way it goes for me. For me, it goes for some reason from left to right. That's Monday, which is this kind of a donut shaped thing. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's now upside down because I flipped it. Friday is actually like that. Monday and Wednesday are circles and they're dark. Tuesday and Thursday are kind of like parallelograms and they're light. And Friday is kind of a trapezoid. These things are a little vaguer than that. And for some reason, I didn't draw them, but Saturday and Sunday are bigger. I guess you might figure out why. They're bigger, and Saturday is lighter and Sunday is darker, and they're kind of rounded squares. Now, I did not intentionally produce this stuff. It just sort of happened. And is it of any use to me at all? I don't know. It may be more trouble. It may cause me more trouble than it's worth. I'm not sure. But I do hang things like dates, appointments. Like right now, I can see the 2 o'clock appointment on the Monday. I can hang appointments on them. And then when it's a month, I don't go left to right. So I'm a little inconsistent. And then months, and when you put months together, you get this. I get this thing here. This is a year for me. That's January, and that is July. So it's a kind of a ellipse thing. That's a year. And then this is going to come out backwards. This is a left-right reversal. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to leave it that way. But it would just keep in mind, it doesn't matter. It's left-right reverse though. This is the schema in my mind, and I did not intentionally produce this thing for numbers. So I start 0 here. This is down to 5. This is up to 10. Then we go through the teens, and then these little semicircles are decades. This is either for numbers or for years. And in fact, I also have this thing for world history. From 0. There's a thing that goes back for the pre-Christian era stuff. There's a thing that goes back down here. But down here it goes, and there's and I can see where things are. Like the fall of Rome is about there. William the Conqueror is up here. Galileo, says. Again, I'm not sure how much this helps me, but it is similar to the visual techniques that people use for memorizing, the visual techniques like the method of loci that are used by mnemonists to remember things. So it may give me a little help. Anyway, it happens, and it happens to me automatically. But it does give me something to grab onto. I can use it intentionally. I can do something for it intentionally. All right. That number schema I can use even with arithmetic situations a little bit. There is a book called The Psychology of Invention in the Mathematical Field by Jacques Hardimar, who is Hardimar, who was a distinguished French mathematician. And he wrote this very interesting book about how the thought processes which vary. And he talked about his thought processes on a famous and easy old ancient theorem in number theory, namely the theorem that there is no largest prime number, which goes back to Euclid. And this is so easy I can understand it, and anybody here can. If you take it's a proof by contradiction. if you take imagine the prime numbers, and I see them sort of on that schema, there's little black dots here and there, but then I've got a line that goes off, and it has to go a long way off, because you imagine taking those prime numbers, a bunch of prime numbers, and imagine the one you think is the biggest, and then multiply it by all the prime numbers less than it. Multiply it by every prime number less than that number, and you get a much bigger number way up there along the line. And then just a little tiny bit ahead of that, you add one. Add one to that number, that product, whatever that product is, you add one. And if you add one to it, you create a number that will not be divisible by any of those primes, including the one you thought was the biggest prime. And therefore, either that number is a prime number itself, or there is a prime number between that number and the one you thought was prime. Maybe that was a little, I don't know if I explained that well enough, but the point is that there's visual imagery involved, and this famous mathematician talked about it that way, as a visual process that kind of, you can kind of use it to guide your process. It doesn't actually perform the process. That's my point here. The labor is in the brain, but it does give you something that from which you can provide some volitional guidance to the process. Okay, I'm getting close to where we ought to start talking together. So let me see here. I did promise in the outline, I think, to talk about why emotions sometimes inhibit thinking. And this is actually, I'm taking this from my paper with Monreal Trout that I will plug again, I guess. What is Consciousness For? That you can find in New Ideas in Psychology of January 2017, that discusses the evolution of consciousness, basically, and volition. The idea here is that you think this is a puzzle. Why emotions inhibiting thought is a bit of a puzzle. Thinking, after all, is good. It's the way humans survive. It's the method of survival. Why would we have evolved something that consistently interferes with thinking? Well, it's a evolutionary thing that goes back to when we were more often chased by animals, I suppose. Out there on the African plains, and the lion starts coming after you. You do not want to have even the possibility that you might volitionally choose to think about the lion's mane, his color, the length of his tail, other things. You want to just enact the automatic action, which is to run away, get away from it without interference. And so the emotion of fear inhibits, it doesn't completely paralyze it, but it inhibits thought process, which enables you, I should put it this way, it inhibits an immediate thought process, but it motivates a later thought process when you get back to assuming you've survived this thing and you get back to the cave or where your campfire is with your buddies, you will now be motivated to volitionally think about what to do next time. So that's why emotions sometimes inhibit thinking. It's and again, I should be careful about this. It's not the conscious experience of the emotion that inhibits the thinking. It's the neural processes that cause those conscious experiences that inhibit the thinking. So let me see here. Oh, I did want to give you another, with respect to imagery, I did want to give you this example problem, and then I'll just summarize. This is a real world example. This actually happened to me, although I did also read about it in a puzzle book, but this actually happened to me. When I was living in New York, and I'm driving home from where I was teaching, the university I was teaching in New Jersey. I was driving home, and I got to where I live, which is on the midtown east side of New York, right next to the East River. It's an apartment complex, and there is a parking lot underneath the complex with one entrance. And so I came up to the entrance, I came out, started to turn in, and I see that there is a U-Haul truck not moving, a stuck truck not moving there. So I stopped. I got out. I went over to see what was going on, and there was this fellow. He said to me, "I've been driving all night from Boston for 5.5 hours. I'm really tired. All I want to do is get my truck into the parking lot, but it's stuck. I drove it in. I turned into the turn where I turned, and it got stuck to the ceiling there. And I tried to put it in reverse and reverse out. I can't do that. I can't go forward. I can't do anything. I'm stuck. And meanwhile, there are other cars building up behind me. There's a big guy, looks like a football player, walking over, and I see possible trouble brewing. Now, I could pretend, I probably should, but I could pretend that I solved this on the spot. But the fact is, I had solved this problem previously because I'd read the problem in a book. In the book I read, it was a stuck truck in the Lincoln Tunnel, where the nostrils of Lincoln Tunnel kind of narrowed down, and the truck went in and got stuck. But it's the same problem. So I knew the answer, and some of you probably will have thought of the answer instantly, without any difficulty at all. But in case you didn't, there's always you can do a little critical thinking. You can exercise a little volition. You step back for a second and try to figure out what the key issue is in this problem. And key issues are, I said one of the things is, figure out what's stopping you. That's one question. Another way of looking at key issues, which I mentioned in the previous lecture, was look at the differences between where you are and where you want to be. The differences between where you are now and where you want to be. And so from that standpoint, I did this visually, basically. It was a visualization. I brought it up here with respect to imagery. I imagine that, or you could do this. I did it originally. Imagine the truck, and it's where it is now is it's too big, and where we want to be is we want to have the size of the height of the truck reduced. We want to reduce that height. Okay, so that's a key issue of a sort, but that's not enough. That wasn't enough for me. I needed to make it more specific and look at little piece by piece. Sometimes you have to go through a number of things that might be key issues to find the actual one. So I thought to myself, okay, what about the roof? Can I do anything? Can I pound the roof down? Well, first of all, I don't want to pound the roof down. And secondly, I have no way of really doing that. I could blow up the ceiling with dynamite or something, but I don't think the management would be very happy with that. So I'm not going to do that. I could take out the windshield, but I don't really want to do that. And I still have to pound down the thing. Then you look at the hood and the motor, the engine block. And I mean, are you going to do something to the engine block? Not really. Linkages that are down there, I didn't think too much, but I finally got down to where I'm sure many of you have gotten to, the tires. And if that hasn't already done it for you, ask yourself, what's a tire? What do I know about tires? And of course, one of the things you know about tires is that you put air in them, and that when the air's in the tire, it's bigger. When the air's out, it's lesser. So by focusing on that key issue, you discover that the answer is let some air out of the tires. So we let air out of the 4 tires, not a lot, just enough. Each of the 4 tires, let them drive in, and everybody got into the parking lot and lived happily ever after until that hurricane came, which was horrible, but that's another story. So that's the problem of the stuck truck. Okay, let me just very briefly summarize, and then we'll, you can come at me. Bob, I can see, is ready to come at me. And I know Joseph had his point to bring up. Anyway, just to summarize. First, conscious experiences are caused by neural activity, but do not cause neural activity. Conscious experience is caused by neural activity, but does not cause it. Volitional mental effort, the effort of free will, is not caused by neural activity, but causes it. The subconscious, quote unquote, is automatic. Conscious volition goes beyond the automatic by activating more knowledge that is relevant to whatever it is you're doing. And so your ability to be creative and critical, that is creatical in my word, depends on volitional effort. All right, I think I'm gonna think I'll stop there. I know there's more things to say, but let's get some questions. So Josh,
before we get
I'll turn it back to you, sir.
Lee, your connection isn't great. I don't think we missed anything, but there were a few times when there was a sort of a pause. So if there's anything you can do about that, please do. But if not, the content is worth wait during those pauses. I'll also just I'll just very quickly say, because I should have said this in the intro, to the people, both the people in London and the people outside of London, if you signed up for this Wednesday's event, our discussion of Rand's essay, The New Fascism, Ruled by Consensus, that is happening in person in London. There's not going to be an online attendance option for that. Hopefully, you're going to be okay after that happens. But yeah, there will be more online stuff. So if you want to ask me about that, you can email me, razi@aynrandcenter.co.uk. Josh.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Lee. And I think
I got a little closer. Did that make any difference?
Do you know, it crackled a couple of times during a talk, but it was very intermittent. I don't think it's something for you to. I think it'd be too distracting for you to try and sort that out right now.
All right. I think because I'm using these, these earphones that use a radio connection.
Okay. So first of all, Joseph had his hand up first. So Joseph, I'm going to unmute you, and if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, sure. This was a question that I thought about a few days ago. So I was hoping that was not too far outside of the subject of today's talk. Basically, my question is that I would like to make much stronger my love of action. I've cultivated a strong love of thinking, and I would like to achieve more of the same when it comes to action. And I was wondering if anyone got any thoughts about that.
Okay, should I go first, Josh? But I don't claim to have a definitive answer to this question, but I'll try something, and we'll see if anybody else wants to jump in. My first reaction was that there might be an issue with the question. Do you really want to love action per se? That sounds a little pragmatist to me, because there are some actions are good and some actions are not so good. So you want to, what you want to love, if you want to love, is good action, productive action, not action per se. So let me just start with that. And also, this is just a reaction, kind of inkling. I don't have a clear thought worked out, despite the fact that you gave me an advance warning. Something it seems to me not quite right about trying to cultivate the love for something. The love for something comes more naturally from doing things. I don't think you have to do that as a intentional process. If you find something you're interested in, you're gonna love it as a natural as a natural result of doing it. I mean, you do have to act. So I guess you have to act in order to love acting. You have to think in order to love thinking. You can't love thinking if you've never done any thinking. You can't even, and you've done plenty of thinking, so that worked, I guess. But you have to actually do it. So but I don't know that I would be trying to cultivate that beyond just making sure that that you do act when it is appropriate to do so. I'll just stop there for the moment. I may want to add to that, but let me see what else. This is Josh territory. Maybe he probably has some really good suggestions.
I don't right now. I'm more trying to get my head around the question. Actually, it doesn't make. My initial response is something to do with: have you got your values in check? Have you got your values hierarchy right? Are you pursuing your top values? Because that's what makes me act. But it's not something that I fully understand yet, Joseph. But I would happily chat with you about that at some point. Harry's got his hand up.
Yeah, I think that's similar. Oh, Harry's got his hand. Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Me okay?
We can hear you, yeah.
Let me use this mic too. I think you can do something to cultivate besides action. That's awareness. I was reminded of Francisco's statement to love is to know and love the nature of the thing. To love a thing is to know and love its nature. So if you think more about what thinking does for you, and that has to be realistic thinking about thinking when a situation comes up. Like when you are very successful at something. And you go back, well, why did I succeed? And you look at the role of thinking and acting in it. So you get clearer awareness of the value of it, of the effects of it. That will increase your love.
Nice. Okay, thanks for that, Harry. Okay, so the next person who had his hand up was Bob.
Lee, I don't think you need to be as afraid of the term subconscious as you are. You seem to be afraid that people will reify it and think that there is a something out there that is other than a conceptual classification and abstraction. And I point out that if you in fact call the subconscious the neural processes, then you are reifying subconscious, making the mistake you're afraid other people will.
But I don't understand, why is that? I'm using the term, if I use that term, to refer to something that actually exists.
But
Reification is when you refer to something that doesn't exist. So the neural processes I'm talking about are actual existence. They're in reality.
but they are not identical to what you call the subconscious.
Well, they are if I define them that way. They are, yeah, sure.
So the physical.
No, I mean, wait a minute. There's a possible confusion here. There is the thing itself, and there's the idea of the processes themselves, the existent, and the idea of the existent. And we shouldn't confuse those two things. The existent here exists. The existent exists. It's a real thing. And I just use the word subconscious and the concept, and I don't have any confusion between the concept of subconscious and the thing that it refers to. I don't confuse those two things.
No.
And that would be a confusion that could come up with any concept whatsoever. Your concept of surfboard could be, if you confused the concept with the surfboard itself, that would be a mistake. I guess that would be Plato's mistake, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, I'm not doing that. You're not doing that. I don't think anybody does that. That's not what I have in mind as the problem. The problem is that people think that the subconscious, see the word sub, the prefix sub is below. So it suggests something that's nearby or like, but in a reduced form. You know, if you're sub, you're kind of like that thing, but you're not quite a full version of it. And that's a mistaken impression. But I think many people do have that impression, I believe.
I guess the crux of the matter is that I see subconscious as a concept of consciousness, not a concept of existence.
Yeah. The concept is, but the thing that it refers to exists. Let us not confuse the concept with the thing that it refers to. Let's not do that.
Yeah.
It's tricky, but that's
All right.
That's
We can
right.
go around on this. Let's stop here.
Okay. We've got just
Harry,
before we've got a few people with their hands up. So, but Mamta's had a question that she wanted to ask a while back, and I'm just wanted to check if Mamta, if that's something, if you do have a question now, or has it been maybe it's been answered, or maybe you don't want to ask a question now. But if you do, please
Feel free.
come in now. Feel free.
Mute. Okay, so
Yeah.
hi. I'm sorry
Hi.
I can't switch on the video because I'm calling from Delhi, India, and it's midnight and I'm in sleep mode. So I had many questions, but
Okay.
Uh,
Go ahead.
Well, just to
I'm
something-
sure you don't want to switch on your video, huh? Okay.
just to interject.
Oh, you
I
want
think,
me to?
Go ahead. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
No, I know.
So,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
okay.
Go ahead.
So, okay, my first question is now concerning the you know, the I forgot the definition where you call eye synthesis, where you see the days in the form of shapes. What is that phenomena called? Eye synthesis.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Well, it's one example. The word is synesthesia. S-Y-N.
Okay.
E-S-T-H-E-S-I-A. Synesthesia is a rather vague. David put it in the. Thank you, David. He put it in the chat.
Okay.
Put the word. It's a rather vague term, and I it is a vague term, but it means something like what the Wikipedia entry said. You experience, for example, when you hear a sound, if you see a color, see in a sense of imagination. In that sense.
So
that happens automatically, without intention, and consistently. Or in my case, I see shapes when I hear sounds, and I'm fairly consistent about the shapes and the location of the shapes. I don't know if I'm absolutely consistent. It's hard to be sure, but I'm fairly consistent. So that's, or in the case of, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
So I have a question concerning this. I have two experiences. So there was a time when I went for my first meditation class, and the professor said, you imagine the smell of bitter gourd. I couldn't do that. But then he said, you imagine the smell of mango. And I was able to do that. And in the entire class,
Yes.
I was the person, so I got scared. But he said, no, it's okay, fine. And after that, I was somewhere in LA, and it was very congested room. I was literally sweaty, and then I imagined that I'm in Himalayas. I have never been to Himalayas, you know. I imagine that I'm in Himalayas and it's full of ice, and I literally don't know from where I got the cool air, you know, in a room full of people. And I was like, oh, wow. But after that, it has been like 10 years probably, or 8 years. Like, I want to imagine the smell of rose, but I can't do that. So does it come and it goes away, or is it the same thing that you described? What was it? I mean, I do have a very visual.
Okay.
I mean, I can imagine the music. I can imagine the visual imagination is very high. I'm a writer. I'm a painter. I love to paint, but this thing was like, I want to imagine smell, but I can't do that now. Or is it a story that I have developed that I can't do that now?
Okay. Well, that's not unusual. First of all, that what you described was not synesthesia. It was imagery, visualization, or imagery in other modalities. Because you can have visual images, you can have auditory images, you can have, what's the term, gustatory images for taste, and you had, I think you had it for smell, and you reported that imagining yourself in the Himalayas, you were cooled down by that, which I think that actually makes sense to me, because you're, again, what happens, and I don't know exactly what happens, but there is a commonality in the neural processes, at least that's what they say. There's research on this, between visual perception and visual imagery. So you get some of the same, there's an overlap of the neural processes. So if you would have, well, I don't know, if you've never been in the Himalayas, that would just come from your knowledge. So this is a complicated example. is actually conceptual knowledge is somehow leading to a sensory experience of being chilled. That's interesting. I'm not sure if I've ever had that. But anyway, the idea that you can't, you try to imagine the smell of a rose and you can't do it. A lot of people, I'm not sure I could do that on straight away. I could get it a little bit. But like I said, for me, for example, colors are hard. It's hard for me to imagine colors. I could do it, but it's not so easy. It's not natural. So this is not anything, what you've said, I don't think is anything abnormal or anything to worry about. But you were able to imagine a mango, which is an excellent thing to imagine. So that's good. That's good. But so anyway, I think that's fine. These are all cases of imagery. Synesthesia is where the sensory experiences are mixed between one modality and another, where you're actually being stimulated in you're being stimulated auditorially, and then you imagine something visually. And also, to be synesthesia, at least in the current definition, it's not intentional. It's something that just happens to you, and there's some consistency in over time of how you experience it. Did you have something else?
I think Lee, we're going to have to limit questions to people so that other people get a chance. So
okay, questions will be limited.
We'll come back to that.
We got okay.
Okay, so we've got Harry, then we've got Adam.
Yeah,
so,
that was interesting.
So, Harry, if you want to go next.
All right, Harry and Adam. Wow.
And then Adam after Harry.
I wanted to clarify the dispute.
There he is. There you go. There you go.
Between Bob and Lee, because you're both right and you're both wrong. So let me state what I see as the metaphysics here. What we call the subconscious is not a process. It's not the brain. It's not a part of the brain. It's not a process in the brain, but it is the capacities arising from the processes in the brain. So Bob is right, I think, that Lee is reifying it, but not intentionally. He's reifying it by imprecision. It is something physical, but the physical thing that is the subconscious is the brain's capacity to interact with the conscious mind. And I don't see anything in that you would object to, Lee. I think it's just an issue of precision of distinguishing a capacity from the stuff that has the capacity. But you're right that people, Lee, you are right.
That's all right. But it's still,
let me go on in that because it'll be quick. You're right that people do.
Go ahead. Yeah.
People do. The thing that Bob said you're worried about, you're afraid of this. People do attribute a soul, a spirit, an awareness, a mind to the subconscious. They do it all the time. They do it on HPL. And I think Bob did it in this conversation when he said the subconscious is a concept of consciousness. It depends upon what you mean by consciousness. If you mean by consciousness, the faculty of awareness, the faculty, the capacity, again, yeah, it's a concept pertaining to the faculty, but so is retina, and so is brain. But if you mean a concept of consciousness the way perception is a concept of consciousness, or clarity is a concept of consciousness, no, it's not. It's not a concept pertaining to conscious awareness. And I think that's what you, Bob, or at least many people have in mind as what the subconscious is, but it is not another mind. It is not a quasi-mind. It is your hard drive. It's your hard disk and the computer, or it is the ability of that hard disk to be read and written to, in my view, but not in Lee's.
First of all, with respect to the capacity issue, yeah, I can see that you can call it capacity. I don't think that's the essential the essential of the issue between Bob and I. The issue is, I think the essential is, you call it a capacity, but the essential is that it's physical. That capacity is a physical, has physical nature. And that's where we really, disagree. That's where I disagree. That's where the disagreement really exists, because I insist that, as far as we know, that's what it is, and we don't know of anything else.
Right. Right. The
And of
only
course,
thing that's
on the other
conscious
issue,
is consciousness. Right? The only thing that's
Yes.
consciousness is
That's all.
consciousness.
And there's nothing else in the universe that I know of that's like consciousness. There's no other existent that I'm aware of other than consciousness that's like it, that's similar to it.
What about potato salad?
Respect of potato salad, but potato salad can go bad. Well, it's okay. All right. So anyway, sure. That's the key thing to keep in mind, is that it's physical. Now, as regards the hard disk and thing, of course, I don't think that the brain is just a hard disk. I think that's much too limited. It's more, these analogies don't work exactly anyway. I don't really like them, but they're so seductive and they're useful, so I got to use them. I think it's more like a computer with a processor, and it does the work. It does the work. That's what I think. But it does the work of cognition only under the direction of actual cognition, only under the direction of volitional consciousness. So, all right.
Great, thank you.
Just leave it at that for the moment.
Okay, so Adam, are you there?
So,
Okay.
thank you for a fascinating talk, Lee. I've been wondering for a while about Kahneman when he identifies System 1 and System 2, how that maps into Rand's distinction between the emotions and the faculty of reason. That is,
well,
System 1 deciding quickly is, seeming like making emotional decisions.
Yeah, I mean, he would probably use the term intuitive, as they like to use, but that, as you probably know, the word intuitive has about 15 different meanings. I described it in terms of whether you are volitionally managing the process or not, because I think what he calls System 2 could involve emotions. It does involve emotions. It's just that emotions are not the boss there. The boss is your conscious mind, conscious volition. But when you're thinking rationally, you certainly take into account your various emotions that you have along the way. So I would not myself make the distinction that way. Now, in Kahneman's case, Kahneman is a modern so-called cognitive psychologist, which means he's a behaviorist. I don't think he really has any, he may not deny consciousness. I can't remember what he says. He doesn't make any use of consciousness in his theory. It doesn't matter to him. He certainly doesn't believe in free will. So he thinks, and this has consequences. His cognitive psychology, which is the popular form now, is focused primarily on how people screw up, how people go wrong, all these things, cognitive biases. And that, I think, is the inevitable result, it's a joke, of a deterministic view of psychology. Because you cannot, on that view, you cannot really account for how valid cognition works. So he doesn't even try to do that. And I heard him being interviewed several times in the past 10, 20 years. And he's always asked in these interviews, what can we do to overcome the cognitive biases? And he basically says two things. He says, I've been studying this stuff for X years, where X depends on when the interview was, and I still make the mistakes, he says. And then his other answer is, we can't really do that much individually, but our institutions, our social institutions, can be constructed to minimize bias or something. Of course, he's very vague about that because that's nonsense. Our social institute, well, anyway, I don't think I have to belabor that point. So Kahneman himself I think a lot of his ideas are brilliant and good, but he has the problem of primarily of not having any idea of free will.
All right, thank you.
You can't use that in his theory.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Great question. So over to you, Steve. Steve's next.
Lee, thank you for your presentation. And yeah, it's excellent. So much great material, so much to think about. The question, can you restate the relationship between self and volition? And I don't know if this is a short-sighted question, but are there aspects of volition and aspects of self?
Okay, maybe you could tell me what you mean by aspects, because I don't know what that would refer to here. What's an aspect?
I don't know. That's why it feels like a rationalistic question.
Just right. No, it's good. This just illustrates something. It illustrates something that Ayn Rand commented on, which is we do not have anywhere near enough concepts of consciousness for discussing this kind of stuff. So we're hampered in it. I've run into this problem all the time. What we do is we borrow terms from physical reality, and we make up stuff, but we need a lot more concepts of consciousness. So I think that's what's making the discussion difficult. Let me say something about can I restate the relation of self and volition? I mentioned that Alan Godhelf and James Gibson think that the self is inherent in any conscious experience. Any conscious experience is me being aware of something, or I perceive the world and I co-perceive myself together. And I think that's true. But I do think myself, now here I'm going out further than I was planning to. Myself, I'm going to cut, I'm going to maybe cut my own head off here or something, or fall into a trap. But anyway, I'm gonna stick my neck out a little bit. I think that those things arose from volition. The conscious experiences that they're talking about arose from volitional action. I don't believe in any kind of cognition without volition. No cognition without volition. And that's from the earliest consciousness had to move around, and in terms of perception, the organism moves around and causes variation in stimulation that would not have existed. And from that is extracted invariants, which are the basis of perception. I cannot discuss that further today. But anyway, I think at the root of consciousness is volitional action. They go together, and that the self is you enacting that action. So how do you know the difference between you and the world? Well, you control your own action. And you can't do that on the world. You don't control. The only way you control a ball's movement is by picking it up with your hand and moving it, that way. You don't have a direct control. So that's how you know that what's me versus what's the world. That's what I think. I'm not extremely confident about that. So that's the best I can do.
Okay, great question.
Can I ask one more short one? There's no such thing, I know. So,
one short one, sure.
Okay.
I'll try to give a short answer, yeah.
Can you give more about how words function as handles?
Well, I gave let's go back to the example. The example I gave was that one example I gave, one of them. And there are, of course, there are many possible examples. There's a multitude. Of the penguin egg question. So you're sitting there, I don't know if that answer occurred to you. Some people get the answer instantly. Some people sit there thinking, well, that's funny. Why is it that the Inuit don't eat penguin eggs? Is there a religious prohibition or something? Think that stuff. But what you need to do there, if you're going that way, is to stop for a second and ask yourself the question and hold in mind the question, what is a penguin? And when you do that, when you exert the mental effort to hold that question in mind, that it acts to pump knowledge, in this case from memory, because you're probably not perceiving any penguins. You probably can't go outside your door and perceive the penguins. But this activates knowledge from memory about penguins. And one of the things that's true about penguins that will come up, that is pumped up, is penguins live in the far south, not the far north. And then the question goes away. So that's what I mean by pumping knowledge. It brings to awareness. More importantly, well, they're both important. It brings to awareness and to action in your thinking, which are not the same thing. It brings the knowledge that would otherwise didn't come to mind. That didn't come to mind automatically. It didn't come just by listening to the question. Didn't just sometimes we get enough from automatic processes, but frequently we don't. And that's why you have to have a listen. Oh, there was a guy, Bob says there's some Inuit down there. Maybe he's doing research down there. And of course, that could be, of course. Yeah. Okay, anyway, that's what I had in mind, roughly.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, Lee, I've got a question for you that I wanted to ask. And
here comes Josh.
This relates to something that's been coming up. Yeah.
Last time, Josh nailed me mercilessly for forgetting that Britain doesn't work on the euro currency. So he got me good last time. But go ahead. Sorry, Josh. Go ahead.
Okay, it's actually something to do with what's been coming up in recent discussions on meeting of the minds, etc. And it's to do with memory. And I've been thinking about this a lot because I know a lot of people will argue that a memory is stored more strongly when it's of a higher value, or there's a level of intensity that goes on, for example. And I work a lot with traumatic memories. I'm trying to get people out of trauma, etc. But I'm wondering, do you believe that everything goes in and everything is stored?
Yes.
That was something that Harry asked the other day. He was just saying some people think everything goes in, and then we have ways of accessing that, or are you on the more on the side of it only goes in if it's of high value or is intense, or there's a level of intensity? The reason I ask the question is I work with a lot of people who can't remember things. They can't remember what happened, and through various techniques they're able to remember, and then they start remembering unbelievably fine details that are kind of quite irrelevant to them, like the socks they wore, or things that used to be on their t-shirt when they were 8 years old, etc. And it's just got me thinking a lot about this subject, and it's of interest to me. And I was just curious what your take is at the moment on memory. If memory is etching grooves in the record, I think you used as an analogy, is it all going and etching or not?
Yeah.
Does the question make sense?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, despite my references to hippocampi and primary visual cortices and other such stuff, I'm not really a neuropsychologist. I don't do neuropsychological research. I read stuff, but so I'm not as far as the neurology is concerned, I'm no expert. And I've studied the memory, but I don't remember that this question was ever decided, has ever been entirely decided. There is some reason to believe that it goes back all the way back to the Wilder Penfield stimulation, brain stimulation studies, that a lot of stuff gets in there that it sort of seems to get lost, which you can't, it's very hard to retrieve later, but it came up in some stimulation. And I'm inclined to believe that's usually the case, but I don't have a strong opinion. That is, I think for the most part, the stuff gets in, the physical traces laid down in the way I described. When you have the experience, I think it's laid down at the same time as you having experience. It doesn't take anything later. And if it's laid down, if the conscious experience is a really strong one, you have a strong emotional, then the trace laid down is a really strong trace laid down at this simultaneously. So I think that's probably, it's all there, and the problems that we have in memory are retrieval problems for the most part. You just can't get at that stuff. But I wouldn't, bet the farm on all that necessarily.
Okay.
That's what I think. So I don't know if that's useful to you, but it certainly fits. That idea certainly fits with what I said. What I think is true, which is that the memory trace is laid down not not after you have the conscious experience or caused by the conscious experience, but at the same time as the conscious experience. There's no need for another act of trace laying down afterwards.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so next we've got Harry.
But I'm not sure, let me just say, throw this back to you. I'm not sure what the practical consequences are of one view or the other. Either way, there's some difficulty that you have to overcome in recovering some of these memories, I guess. Although I'm not a big believer in that, what is that called, when you supposedly repressed memory stuff?
Yeah.
That the therapists, you go to, and they bring out these alleged repressed memories of being molested by your parents as a child. I think mostly that's nonsense for the most part. But that's my opinion, based on the research done. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, over to Harry.
Okay, this kind of integrates the question about why are words handles, or in what way are they handles, and the last question, which is that I gave the analogy of a hard drive, which Lee properly criticizes too limiting, but it's also not a hard drive in the sense of a hard drive has a read-write head that goes out and picks up a sector that it knows the address of and reads that sector, and then the information is sent back to the CPU. But memory is associational. Or if you don't like the word association, and I tend not to, relational. It's relational.
Yeah. Relational is much better.
Connective, so that a word is a handle for retrieval, because that's the way retrieval works. You have one thing in your awareness, and it draws up the things that it is neurally connected to make them aware, to create the awareness that they encode, which also relates to the issue of Wilder, Penfield, and whether everything is remembered. I have absolutely no position on that, but you could argue that everything comes in and is laid down in some sense, is encoded, but you only form associations with, connections to the things that are meaningful to you, so that it could all be in there. And when we talk about you can't address them, you have no associations that you formed to them, and that's why you can't pull them up. And words are our biggest means, not the only means, but they're sensuous symbols that serve as nodes, central pivot points that various connections come into. So one word, like capitalism, will key off a whole lot of information, so much that you have to spend a lot of time pushing the different aspects of it. So I think that, maybe memory all comes in a sort of raw form, but you have to form some link to it in order to ever retrieve it. And that could be the function of what the conscious mind contributes to the process.
Any comments on that, Lee?
I was with you all. I was with him all the way to the end, where he said the conscious mind contributes. It's all neural. The making of connections. Anytime you have a experience, in a conscious experience, I'm glad this came up because I forgot about this. Anytime you have a conscious experience of a new connection, you feel, that's a new connection. It was made by the neural processes involved. That's where the connection came from. Now, volitional action, and this, certainly Harry and I agree on this. Volitional action can facilitate the creation of new connections, because it causes neural activity to go beyond what it would occur automatically, more neural activity. So that's certainly true. But the conscious experience itself is just a creation of the neural processes and does not make the connections itself. That's my position on that.
And I disagree with that.
I think that would be a whole new talk, Harry. So I think what we'll do is we'll take another question now from
It could be.
Mamta. Do you have another question?
Yeah, I have one, not question, but I mean, a sharing. So when Gautam Buddha, he underwent the self-consciousness, self-realization thing. So he had recall all the 500 past life in his memory. So that's the power of consciousness, or that's how memory and consciousness are linked. That's to my knowledge. And the second question, which I'm just curious
What
to
was that?
ask.
Buddha you were talking about?
Yeah, Gautam Buddha.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So when he was sitting under the tree and he was meditating and he realized, so actually he went back into his previous, he got the memory recall from his past lives. So they were like whatever amount of life, to my knowledge, they were 500 lives. He recollected everything.
So would you like me to comment on that? I
Okay.
will comment on that anyway. To my knowledge, I mean, let me put it this way: I would not believe that somebody could remember 500 past lives unless there were extremely good evidence for it, and I think that's lacking. I don't even see how that could happen. Really, I don't see the process by which it could happen. But in any event, I don't think there's I don't think there's sufficient or even any evidence to believe in anybody's memory of past lives. I'm just not aware of I want something that would constitute proof, or at least strong evidence, and I think it's lacking. So I'm not sure what actually happened. People, even Buddhas, people do have hallucinations, or they have things going on in their mind that they think people are talking to them, or people are from the past are talking, and those things are hallucinations, at least in the absence of other evidence. So that's my thought there.
Well, we're not gonna follow up on the past lives question. But if anybody else has a question or a comment, now is the time, because we are right at the end.
Time.
And while I give people a few seconds to raise their hand or post a question in the chat, I'll also post a link to our YouTube channel in the chat. This talk will go on our YouTube channel, as have many great past talks that we've had here, and our daily Facebook show that goes live on Facebook, goes edited on YouTube every day. So I encourage everybody to subscribe to that. And since I don't think we have any more questions, I want to thank Lee, and I want to thank Josh.
And I want to thank you, Razi, and all of your co-conspirators for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks. And
Josh.
Thanks, Lee. I want to thank all of you for making this evening possible. It's been great fun, and Lee, it's always a pleasure, and I hope there'll be more to come down the line.
Oh, I certainly hope so. I think we can probably think of all kinds of things.
Yeah, and I mentioned that this Wednesday's discussion is not going to be online; it's going to be in person. But we still have the Monday events that are going to be online. They're going to be free, and some of the upcoming speakers we have are Lisa Van Dam, Yaron Brook, Quent Cordair. So we have interesting stuff coming up on Mondays. We also have interesting stuff coming up every day on Facebook. So 6 p.m. UK time, that's 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. We have our show, The Daily Objective. Tomorrow's co-hosts are Nikos and Mark Pellegrino. Wednesday's co-hosts are tomorrow is Nikos, Mark Pellegrino, and Rucka. Wednesday is Nikos and Jonathan Honig with guest Johan Norberg, who will discuss his latest book titled Open, the Story of Progress or the History of Progress. So thanks again, and I hope to see you all again soon.